in the moment of history where we find ourselves in, pessimism is a luxury we simply cannot afford. And the pessimism that legitimately derives from our analysis, from our lived experiences and our observations can, must, and should be overturned by the pessimism of our thought, our action, our creativity, and our courage. Now, the universe has been talking to us through the 1997 Asian financial crisis, which some of you might remember, to the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, which hopefully most of you remember, and COVID, which I think all of us remember. But if you look at the response of those in power, in government and business, as we come out of those crises, right, it's all about system recovery, system projection, and system maintenance. But what is actually needed is system innovation, system transformation, and system redesign. Martin Luther King, oops, I went in the wrong direction. Martin Luther King, speaking at a meeting when I was 4 months old, said, "My friends, as I come to the end of my speech, I want to note that in the field of modern child psychology, there's a very dominant term called maladjusted." Now, all of us want to be well-adjusted and not suffer from schizophrenia or other mental illnesses. But my friends, I say to you, there are certain things in our world that are so unjust and immoral that good, decent people should refuse to be well-adjusted to. He then goes on to say, "I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry, racial discrimination, and in the economy," he says, "I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few when millions of God's children are smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in an affluent society." Unquote. So if that was relevant to the US in 1965, it is 1,000 times more relevant to the US today, and as it is to virtually every country around the world. So now I want to ask you to do something else, which is close your eyes, and I want you to think about this question. So, sorry, maybe open your eyes for a second. I forgot to tell you, in the longer version of Martin Luther King's speech, he says, "I now call upon decent men and women from around the world to come together to set up a new international organization, which sadly was never formed, to be known as the International Association for the Advancement of Creative Maladjustment." Okay, so this Creative Maladjustment organization was never formed, sadly. But basically, it's about people who look at the status quo and say, this cannot be right. This trajectory that we're on is suicidal. And so creative maladjustment is not accepting the status quo. So now you can close your eyes again and think about what Albert Einstein once said about the definition of insanity. He said, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting to get different results." Just stop for a second and think about that for your own lives. Right? In all honesty, I have to raise up my hands, and you can open your eyes now, and anybody else who feels comfortable to the answer to the question whether you meet that definition of insanity, I'll put up my hands. Right? And many of us have been insane out of goodwill. You know, like we did things out of our best judgment about what was possible to be done. But we are at a moment of history where history will judge us harshly if we bury our head in the sand and say, just because we did something for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, we have to continue to do it exactly in the same way we did it, because that's all we know. Okay? So this is a time then for us to ask some difficult questions. And so, yeah, I want to give you a picture. This is not a scientific assessment, but this is just based on 45 years of observation. So if you ask yourself today, where does civil society activity as well as what philanthropy invests? And if you separate that into 3 areas, macro, meso, micro, where macro is governance change, meso is policy change, and micro is delivery of projects and programs. and then you ask yourself, what's the current level of investment, right? I would still say that 80% is still going into projects and initiatives, or 15% into policy change. There was a time when I did this 10 years ago with Van Jones at the Council and Foundations meeting, where that 15% was 5% at that time. It has increased considerably over the last 12 years, and about 5% going to addressing fundamental governance changes. So, yeah, I want to say, I'm not making the argument that one is more precious than the other. All of them have their meaning and their place, but we got the proportionality wrong, right? Because, for example, if we didn't have micro levels of engagement, projects and programs, we would not be knowing what we are talking about can be tested and making mistakes and learn from it and so on. So there is a value in it, right? But we cannot continue to keep this rough percentage in place, because then we will be confirming that we are engaging in incremental tinkering, or as some people put it, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic while you manage these things. I think you might have to do it. So I've been for years saying that we have too little philanthropy in the world and too much of philanthropy. But having said that, right now, if I look at the balance of forces in the world, look at where governments are, where business is, and where philanthropy and other parts of society is. Unequivocally, I say to you that today, whether people like it or not, the best hope we have for seismic shift forward is courageous philanthropy. Because philanthropy still has more space to take risks and innovate and do things that people might think crazy. Today, when we look at government, sadly, in far too many countries in the world today, governments and the political process has lost its way, this country being a prime example of that. So this was an article that this quote is from an article that I wrote as an open letter to philanthropy, urging philanthropy to think about addressing the biggest challenge that we face, which is the communications deficit. And that is, we're just not communicating to large enough numbers of people in a way that moves them and shifts them. I'll do a quick experiment here, right? How many of you feel comfortable that you can explain to your parents, your siblings, and your closest family what your work is about? And I'd love for people on Zoom to say yes or no, whether you are able to do that. How many of you feel that you can do that easily? Okay, about 1/3. So let me tell you that quite often we are not able to speak to our families because we speak a language and a set of ideas that is not the language that they operate in. Your families are in the end not fundamentally different from other ordinary people, right? If we do not speak to them in ways that move them, to excite them and so on, we don't stand a chance of moving things forward. So the other thing that we need to do, so I'm just running through some big strategies of what we need to do, and then I'm going to end on ARTivism. So we need to absolutely turbocharge intersectionality. And for those of you not familiar, the feminist movement gave us this wonderful wisdom decades ago, saying that if we wanted to advance gender equity, we needed to understand how gender equity intersects with race, class, ability, and so on. And sadly, we ignore that. And today, what must be very clear, that we made a mistake with regard to climate change. The idea of framing climate change as an environmental issue was a key tactical and strategic blunder. That we have to understand that climate change is a cross-cutting issue and start engaging it in that way. The other thing we need to do is resist cognitive dissonance. Today, what we have, and yeah, I want to be honest, I suffer from it, and I suspect we all suffer from it, which is basically, there's an elephant sitting in this room, for example, which is, where are we towards the 1.5 degrees, right? But for those of you who don't know, we're pushing on 1.4, right? And at 1.5, the science says, once you surpass that, you're in deep crisis. But the question that always gets asked is it too late? So for me, I would say 2 years ago, in 2 days in April, we received so much of rain in my home city that 450 people died in 2 days, right? Billions of rands in infrastructure damage. For those 450 people that died, and for the millions others that are dying now annually, it's too late for them. But the question is, do we have time to secure the future of the majority of our people on the planet? And my answer to that the answer to that has to be yes, even though sometimes you doubt whether you wonder whether you're being too optimistic. The other thing we need to do is change the way that philanthropy and activism has operated for far too long, which is, so when I was the head of Greenpeace or Amnesty, I would get briefed to go into this meeting or the UN Secretary General or this community or this network. And I was advised by my colleagues, and after a while you start believing that you know, that when you walked into those spaces and took the platform, you had to speak as if you absolutely knew what you were talking, right? That you knew the detail of what we need to do. When in reality, often we don't. We can know that we need to reduce emissions, right? Clear. But exactly how are we going to go about doing that in detail? Is it easier to mobilize people to be part of that enterprise if a few clever people like us go and say, this is what you need to do? Or is it easier to mobilize people if you go and say, that's the direction that we need to travel in? Can you join us and help us figure out the details of exactly how we're going to travel that? And so to have an approach of emergence that we don't have to have all the answers clarified and put into a master plan. We can, and it's advisable, especially given that we live in such a moment of fluidity. Let's say you did a strategic plan before February of 2022, and then Russia invades Ukraine. Your strategic plan is out of the window, right? Geopolitically and globally, so many things have changed, right? Of course, there's some core elements might still be valid, but obviously that's going to have a big. So us needing to be light-footed, needing to be less dogmatic, is what I am advocating for in all the forums that I'm part of. Then the other thing that we need to do is recognize that one of the biggest mistakes that both activism and philanthropy has made over time is mistaking access for influence. Right? So I'm probably the person, one of the people in the world who's made this mistake the most. Right? So you go into these meetings with those in power, appeal to them, go with your research findings, go with what science is saying, and so on. And what I've now come to realize, that 90% of the time, that is a ritualistic exercise. That what happens at the end of the meeting is they tick off a box saying civil society consulted, we tick off a box saying government or business lobbied against, but the reality is almost 80% of heads of state or ministerial level or CEO meetings are bad. I knew exactly what they're going to say at the end of the meeting. They knew exactly what I was going to say, and we just go through the motions of it. And of course, we spend huge amounts of time preparing for it, getting to there, and so on. Am I saying we should not engage with government and business? Absolutely not. But what I'm saying is we need to understand the difference of both those. What is access, what is actual influence, and we have to get the proportionality right. Because most of our gaze is towards those with power, and insufficient amounts of our gaze are to those that are powerless. But the basic math is that those with power will only listen to people like us when we are able to show that the powerless are genuinely alongside us or behind us or standing with us. Otherwise, they have no incentive to actually make the big changes that we're asking them to. Now, the other mistake that we have made is that we have often mistaken, we think that governments and corporations as well tend to dominate societies and control us through the deployment of the repressive state apparatus. By repressive state apparatus, we mean army, police, formal laws, and all of that. But actually, as Louis Althusser, the French philosopher, wrote in the 70s, the more insidious and more powerful form of control is not the repressive state apparatus, but is the ideological state apparatus, which is your framework for education, framework for religion, funding of arts and culture, and critically and most importantly, the framework for communications and media. And I'm not saying that the repressive state apparatus is not horrendously difficult at the moment with shrinking democratic space and civic space in many parts of the world. But actually, if we look at the United States as one of the best examples, you have got virtually two societies completely parallel to each other. Those that live on Fox, Newsmax, and right-wing talk radio, and those that live on CNN, NBC, and the others, right? And you've got these calcifying, consolidating echo chambers, which is dangerous for dialogue, engagement, and people being able to win over each other through meaningful dialogue and engagement, rather than through violence. So the last strategy that I think we need to do is what the rest of my talk is going to be, is about energizing ARTivism. So ARTivism is the intersection of art and activism, harnessing the creative expression to advocate for social or political change. It utilizes various artistic mediums to convey powerful messages and provoke critical reflection on pressing issues. Now, if I might just take a personal moment, in January 2022, our son, who is a rapper and hip hop artist, basically says to his mom and I, you know, guys, you're really bad at your jobs. So I'm saying, why do you say that? But everything that you've been fighting for since you were teenagers, gender equity, human rights, democracy, sustainability, all of these things are moving in the wrong direction. So I asked him, so why do you think that is? He says, you think you can move people by facts and figures and science and rational arguments, and you'll aim all your narratives at the brain. What your activism has done has ignored the heart, body, and soul. And then he referenced Donald Trump and said, Trump doesn't bother about the brain at all. He goes straight for the heart. And he's saying, I'm not saying you need to do what Trump does and lie incessantly, but you don't have to be as boring with the facts like you are. So I'm going to just walk you through some, right? So this year was just a light thing, which is if we keep ignoring climate change, the one good thing about it is it will solve a whole range of problems for us, because basically we'll end systemic racism, we'll end stupid wars, we'll end crazy capitalism, and so on, because the end result is, you know, that phrase when we say, save the planet. Quite frankly, I've been saying this multiple times, the planet does not need saving. If we continue on the trajectory that we are, we warm it up so much, we destroy our water, destroy our soil, can't grow food because the heat has gone up. We will be gone, the planet will still be there. And all of us who are concerned about saving the planet, the good news is once we become extinct as a species, the oceans will replenish, the forests will grow back, and so on. So don't worry about the planet. The fight that we are in here is a fight for human survival, especially right now, urgently in the global south. Now, this year, I'm going to say to you that I'm going to share this with you, but this was in 2011. This is an example of how not to do a slogan, right? That's why I'm asking you to capture the slogan, right? So 2011, we taking quite a high level of risk here, going to occupy an oil rig in Greenland, and we say stop Arctic destruction. At this point, most people in the world don't know the Arctic serves as a refrigerator and an air conditioner of the planet, takes the edge of the sun's rays and so on. And anyway, next one. Okay, so I'm going to show you this clip. My colleague, who's my young man, he's 25 years old, insisted that I show this, but I'm embarrassed by it, but it's just basically to show how you get things wrong. Okay, go for it. So this is us going to occupy this rig.
I'm on the Greenpeace ship Esperanza in the Arctic. We are about 150 kilometers from the coast of Greenland. Very soon, I'll leave the ship, cross into an exclusion zone, and climb the controversial Arctic oil rig, the Leif Erikson. I have been so inspired by the actions of the 20 activists who have gone before me to take action on this oil rig in the past weeks. I follow in their footsteps, and I take with me 50,000 more who have signed our online petition to stop Arctic drilling. I'm going to board the rig myself and deliver the 50,000 names with a personal plea that Kern leaves the Arctic. For me, and for many people around the world, this is now one of the defining environmental struggles of our time. It's a fight for sanity against the madness that sees the disappearance of the Arctic ice not as a warning, but as an opportunity to seek further profits. Fossil fuels, oil, gas and coal-driven climate change is already making life hard for millions of people. I have seen this firsthand in Africa, where I come from. Throughout the world, sadly, it is the people in poor countries who are facing the first and the most brutal impacts of climate change. All of us who care about the future of our children and grandchildren, we have to draw a line somewhere. And I say that we draw that line here today in the Arctic.
Massive amounts of water coming down. Entry point on rig blocked by gate. Going in now.
Leif Erikson, this is Esperanza. Greenpeace International Executive Director Kumi Naidoo is boarding the Leif Erikson as part of a peaceful protest. He's seeking a meeting with the captain of the rig where he will present a petition signed by 50,000 supporters who demand to see Cairns oil spill response plan.
So, the main thing he wanted you all to see was how scared I was. So my brother, who's a year younger than me and a political prisoner in the old days in South Africa, goes on national television in South Africa while I'm in prison in Greenland, to mobilize the South African government to do something to accelerate my release. The journalist asked him on national television, so what exactly is this issue Kumi is engaged in? My brother, who is a PhD in optometry and all of that, very educated guy, says, I must be quite honest with you, I don't have a clue what it is. But what I know, and then he says, but what I know is that he must be deeply committed to it because he can't swim to save his backside. So then anyway, after a week in prison, I get back home to Durban, and one of the kids in the family says to me, and she's studying environment, and she says, Uncle Kumi, what a stupid slogan, stop Arctic destruction. Nobody knew what you were talking about. So I say to her, okay, darling, what would be a better slogan? And she said, say Santa Claus now. But just pause a minute and think about what she's saying. She's saying, you activists, and she verbalized it after, that you activists are constantly projecting your consciousness on the people that you're trying to motivate and move towards you. If the only conception that people have about that part of the world is Santa Claus is chilling there for most of the year and he comes around Christmas, then connect with that. Don't over-intellectualize things. So, to be clear though, arts and culture has been used and abused by all sorts of political interests. So I don't want to actually present this in a kind of, oh, ARTivism is going to save us, because my one-liner on ARTivism, which was in that letter to the philanthropic sector, went like this. Arts and culture on its own will not deliver our salvation from the climate crisis and the intersecting crisis. However, without harnessing the full power of arts and culture, we're almost guaranteeing that we're going to fail, because we're never going to get close to meeting the communications challenges that we face. So yeah, this Maya Angelou quote is really important for us to understand why this is important, because, you know, if you did an experiment at a dinner table, right, with family or friends, and asked them, what's the best book you read, the best movie you saw, the best song you sing, or the best speech? After a few minutes, people might remember what it was. And then you say, what was that movie about? Or what was that book about? 80% of the time, people will not be able to tell you what it was about, but it will tell you how it made you feel. And we have completely taken out of activism the importance of feelings and emotions and so on. So during COVID, this was in East Africa, you can see very powerful use of murals. And the Arab Spring had a very strong artistic component to it. And I should tell you, when George Floyd died, some of the most powerful murals we saw around the world came from Syria and Libya, where people were drawing murals in solidarity. The anti-apartheid struggle, where most of our people were left unable to read and write by the apartheid system, we critically needed arts and culture and dance and song to be able to educate and move people. Without that, we wouldn't have. Even today, in a country like Senegal, Yenama is a youth-based hip-hop cultural group of young people who have had a huge impact in preventing a president staying in power indefinitely, and they've been mobilizing across the world. The Tumani Festival, this is a really powerful and interesting thing where it happens in Malawi. It's the only cultural festival that happens in a refugee camp that has gone mainstream, where non-refugees come there and have a good time and so on. But it was about using arts and culture to build dialogue and understanding between refugees and the local people. And this is a story which for me was iconic. If you can look at me for a second, I just want to tell you the story. It's a neat story. And then we'll go to the plug. So the year is 2019, and Olafur Eliasson, who's one of the most creative artists in the world, calls me up and he says, "Kumi, I really would love for you and Mary Robinson, the former UNI Commissioner for Human Rights, to come to Iceland on such and such a day." So I said, "What happened, Olafur?" He says, I said, "What's happening?" So he says, "No, we're having a funeral." And I asked him, "A funeral?" I said, "I'm so sorry, who passed away?" He said, "A glacier." Right? I said, "Oh, that's interesting." So on one early Saturday morning, the Prime Minister of Iceland, myself, and Mary Robinson addressed about 500 people about this glacier now that is dead and will never be rehabilitated. We all climbed up this dead glacier, and there was this plaque that was put there. The glacier was called OK, which clearly wasn't okay, but it was called OK. So it says, OK is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as a glacier. In the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening, what needs to be done. Only you know if we did it. So if people are reading in the future, hopefully it means that we did it. This action, which is quite cheap to organize compared to some of the Greenpeace actions that I was part of. 95% of the Greenpeace actions never came close, under my leadership, never came close to having the impact that this action had. And that actually was a bit of an epiphany for me. And the work that I'm doing around ARTivism now starts with Olafur and I at the end of this event saying, how do we bring the worlds of arts and culture and the worlds of activism together? So, by the way, this was the glacier when it was healthy. That's what's left of it. The other thing that we've seen is how people have been, in biomimicry, some people call it, and so on, but where large-scale environmental artwork, for example, in Finland, involved the planting of 11,000 trees on a man-made mountain, and it symbolizes the importance of restoration and sustainable land use. The next picture, you'll see how they've actually, done it. The next example is there's this collective known as BI Design Collective. They create intricate large-scale illustrations that explore the social and environmental impacts of various issues, including climate change. Next one. This is another example of it. I'm going to go quick now. Of course, we've seen very powerful interventions through documentary films as well as other films. I mean, The Inconvenient Truth, I think we'll recognize whether you liked it or hated it and so on. It did have a seismic impact on the conversation. This year is the extinction. This is artists in Argentina that uses gigantic installations of hands to raise awareness about the need for environmental protection and in Argentina. And Then also I want to just remind ourselves that even in conventional marches, right, you have a very big artistic component to it based on what people actually saw. So this was 2014 with the Occupy Wall Street. Keep going. Okay, so that was just to give you a picture. Now, in the remaining time, and I'm going to try and do this in like about 8 to 10 minutes. I don't know whether I will succeed. So I want to now walk you through the work that I've been engaged in practically and where we've landed, right? So what I'm going to show you right now is the marketing campaign of, this has been done with the support of a pro bono advertising agency out of Denmark. And it's a collaboration of those that are working on shifting popular culture being driven by UN Live Museum of the United Nations, on whose board I serve. And then those that are driving the Energizing ARTivism, which is a Global Commons Alliance, which I think the ClimateWorks supports, and the Rikirik Foundation for the Promotion of ARTivism. And then there's another, which is about community arts infrastructure, which is driven by the Community Arts Networks and the BMW Foundation. So collectively, all of these groups and all their partners are just about to sign off on this global public awareness campaign, and it goes something like this. And we'll go very fast here, okay? So it's called the MOVE, M-O-V-E, the MOVE campaign. So it's called We Move to Unleash the Power of Art and Culture to Accelerate Positive Change for a World in Emergency. We move creative expression from being left out to be a way in, to get a seat at the table for the many to be included in turning conversations into actions. We move the narrative of the future from doomed to desirable, to help people see the world's emergencies and possibilities in new lights. We move to inspire people to realize their power to act in a constructive, collaborative spirit. We move to facilitate the conditions for self-change, not change itself. We move so that together we can move the world, because if we are not moved, how can we move? We move so that together we can move the world. The world is no longer in a state of urgency, it is in a state of emergency. Even though this emergency is asking us to move faster than ever, we are not able to move people fast enough. Harnessing the full power of arts and culture on its own will not deliver, but without it, we will fail. And our goal here is to mobilize 1 billion new participants to take action for our collective survival. To set social change in motion at scale, we need to inspire it and make it relatable. So the question then is, how can we enable a positive culture of participation, not just spectating? And some of our movements, including ones that I've been part of, actually, its theory of change was very comfortable about creating a lot of spectators rather than, getting people to be taking action themselves. So, next one. So our creative expression has always been our way to move attitudes and behaviors. What I'm saying is nothing new, but to shape beliefs, sense of belonging, habits, for better or for worse. So according to leading behavior change scientists, culture in its broadest definition, including film, music, art, faith, sports, games, comedy, consumerism, and much more, act as a key driver towards changing mindsets and behavior, representing a medium that meets people where they are in their everyday lives, inspires and drives passion. And according to the study out of MIT, mass culture communication holds the power to convey values and behavioral patterns that generates profound changes in social and environmental outcomes. So when we unite to enable art and culture to drive positive change, we move towards a brighter future is the proposition. Because as we move forward, we move the world forward. Then we move the world forward to make change for good. I should just say this is our boy here performing in concert, sorry. Yet the power and potential of art and culture to drive social change is underappreciated and untapped. To get recognized is the urgent need for uniting across the globally fragmented landscape of social change makers. And that's why we've been trying over the last 18 months, laying the foundation for what's just being rolled out now, which is to facilitate an architecture to embrace art and culture and to move people. And The elements of it is convene, create, connect, scale up, and act. I'm going to go fast because of time. And these are some of the different players involved in the campaign. And sorry, let's go to that list, the next one. Yeah. So this year is I just thought I'll just give you a flavor. So the people that are in the energizing ARTivism effort, this is the first group of people that have agreed. We've got about 15 invitations out, but just to give you a sense of people, they are from different parts of the world, doing different kinds of work. Some are in music, some are in arts and culture, some are in mass communications and so on. Some of you might know Alexander Orifino from Brazil, who does amazing work using film as a way to communicate. And so I just would summarize. So the Rikirik Foundation and the Global Commons Alliance is leading on the Energizing ARTivism, which is about convening, about building a global portal and doing what we call ARTivism diplomacy. The Community Arts Network and the Community Arts Lab is focused on creating local spaces and community arts infrastructure. Just to give you an example of the kind of thing, in Zimbabwe, the leading playwright is trying to put shipping containers in Harare townships for them to be multi-purpose art centers. So some hours people can watch movies, other hours musicians can come and jam, others people can do visual art and so on. And then shifting popular culture is very much driven by UN Life. I'm going to say move forward because I'm just going to speed it up. So what we've been saying, so the message of the campaign, by the way, this is not finalized, it's still being tweaked. So we're saying to artists and creators, make art and culture with the intention of moving people to action. To decision makers, we're saying give art and culture a seat at the right tables, and to resource providers, create an enabling positive change with the role of arts and culture. So I want to give you good news that one of the first things that we've been working on just was launched as part of Earth Day. So I'm going to ask you a trick question first. How many of you know who was the first musical performer in the history of the planet? Anybody?
Birds.
Sorry?
Birds.
So Bakiba says birds, and she's in the right ballpark. Basically, it was nature. Oceans, waves, waterfalls, volcanoes, whales, and other animals, right? And so we launched this very beautiful thing 2 weeks ago at the United Nations, where basically we've got 100 musicians across the world to use the sounds of nature in their music, right? And there's a database of millions of nature sounds that has been collected over time. And they are all archived and so on. So if you want a whale or this kind of bird or that kind of bird, you can go and try and find it. So, for example, if, say, Helen launched her latest upcoming song, she would say Helen Mountford, and in brackets, featuring nature. So now you go on Spotify, one of the best performing artists on Spotify right now, since the launch, is nature. Because so many artists have released the songs with nature there, right?
Nice.
So the theory of change is somewhat different. It's in the context of emergence. So rather than us trying to speak to the people who consume music, we are going to say, let's get musicians who are loved and respected by the people on Spotify and Apple Music and Bandera, as well as many southern streaming platforms as well. We want to get all of them on board. So Spotify was the first obvious partner to get on board. And we made sure with them that they didn't have an exclusive deal. And so they were fine that we can include all other streaming platforms. Now, one of the unintended consequences, so this is primarily about consciousness shifting, right? So we figure if the artists are messaging around the importance of nature, these 2 billion people on those platforms are more likely to hear it more powerfully than if one of us had to say it, right? So, I've more or less said this, but I should just tell you there's an unintended fundraising thing that's come out which when we did the math a couple months ago, looks really promising. So basically, if Ellen published a song and used 5% of your song, use nature, then 5% of the proceeds of that song goes into a global fund. And that fund, which is, we've set up an advisory committee made out of frontline communities and indigenous people's representatives, and those will go towards supporting indigenous peoples and frontline communities biodiversity efforts. So, and if you want, on Spotify it says nature now a verified artist on Spotify. And has anybody seen it since its launch by any chance? Nobody. Yeah. So like me, you're not spending enough time on Spotify. So then before I show you this, another part of it is we are doing these short videos of ARTivism in practice around the world. We've collected already about 60 pieces, and we're going to be releasing this from 2 weeks from now. Every week we're going to be releasing one. I'll just show you the first one quickly.
Hello everyone, I'm Kumi Naidoo and welcome to our video series on ARTivism. Just as the name suggests, ARTivism is where art and activism unite to inspire and transform. For decades, passionate change makers all over the world have embraced art's power to convey profound messages, spark critical conversations, and inspire action for justice and social change. Enjoy.
In this video, we'll focus on the theme of centering marginalized voices, where artists and activists are amplifying the experiences of refugees, women, and indigenous communities disproportionately affected by threats to the natural systems that support life on Earth. Let's go to the Brazilian Amazon, where the People's Palace Projects is supporting cultural exchange between indigenous and non-indigenous artists, activists, and academics. They have facilitated more than 100 partnership projects across 23 countries, reaching over 1,240,000 people. For example, in 2018, criminals destroyed ancient engravings on the walls of Kamakuaka, a sacred cave site that holds customs, beliefs, and ancestral history for the Wauja people. Specialists from Factum Foundation worked with indigenous partners from the People's Palace Projects to use laser scanning and 3D printing to create an accurate full-sized replica of the cave and its engravings, which will be housed in a cultural center in the heart of Ulupuene village. In 2023, the People's Palace Projects also produced Echoes, an indigenous film festival focusing on land rights struggles and climate impact and celebrating indigenous storytelling. Hosted in London and Paris, the festival featured 18 thought-provoking works from 21 filmmakers representing 13 ethnic groups across 10 regions in Brazil and neighboring countries.
To learn more about ARTivism, the Global Commons, and how you can get involved, visit the Global Commons Alliance, the Community Arts Network, and the Riki Rik Foundation for the Promotion of ARTivism, and join us in September of 2024 for the inaugural Global ARTivism Conference. This exciting event will bring together diverse voices from arts, education, and activism to engage in meaningful discussions, workshops, and exhibitions, and explore the transformative power of ARTivism.
Thank you. I'm almost done. So this set of videos will be hopefully being promoted by a range of partners and start releasing from over a week to 10 weeks. The next one. This is just the background to the conference. I'm not going to spend too much on that. I want to just end with two more slides. So one of the biggest mistakes that activism has made historically, understandably though, because see, activism starts from the point of how people are marginalized, excluded, repressed, and so on. Sometimes what happens is because that's your starting point, you end up thinking that people actually have much less agency than they still have, irrespective of all that historically has come in people's ways. So basically what I did here was I looked at 4 quadrants. This was during lockdown, I did this. which was harnessing our autonomy, harnessing our creative participation, harnessing our wealth, and harnessing consumption. And I would argue that the critical thing facing philanthropy and climate activism today is to create multiple pathways for people to be able to participate in a range of different ways without necessarily always judging that this is more important than that, but to create a vibrant participatory culture. Because if we are to use Naomi Klein's book title to change everything, we're going to need everybody engaged. And we have to think about a level and a scale of participation never before seen on this planet. So I want to end with this note, and this note is about you and me, right? And about all the people that we work with. And right now, I also want to say that we are in denial about what this work means for us as human beings, personally. If you're reading the data every single day from different countries about how bad things are and how it's, how we're having setbacks and so on, I want to make an appeal to say that we need a scale of participation for two reasons, to be on a much higher scale. One is to put the kind of pressure on those in government and business to act much than they otherwise would. But there is a second reason, and that participation itself is going to be an antidote to the global mental health crisis that we are facing, which is being exacerbated by eco-anxiety and climate anxiety. And so I offer, in closing, to all of you, to just say that I have been dialoguing. Being at Stanford has been interesting because I've been speaking to lots of young people who, every conversation I come out of, I go into the conversation and it's very clear to me 5 minutes in that my job is to lift the spirits up, right? And I try my best to do that. And by the end of each conversation, I am completely wasted because it took such an effort. And I don't want to lie to them. I don't want to, if they say, but what about this? What if Trump gets elected again? What would that mean? And all of these things are sort of deeply troubling, but it's critically important that we recognize that right now, and the stats prove it out. The Imperial College in London and the Wellcome, supported by the Wellcome Trust, are doing a massive global mental health and climate change study. Actually, the Critic Foundation in Africa is working as their partner to move that forward. And so I say this to the leadership here, as well as to each and every one of you. We have to recognize that the moment we find ourselves is not a walk in the park, but it can be best addressed by us naming it and acting intently to make sure that we are supporting people in the way we move forward. So with that, I do have a final video, but I'll only show that to you if time permits. But for now, merci beaucoup, obrigado, thank you very much.